as ever-present as they were for the ancient Greeks, the same gods were not always worshipped throughout the land. 3,000 years ago, Greece was a patchwork of independent city-states, linked by a common language, culture, and trade. But while the principal deities such as Zeus, Prometheus, and Demeter were worshipped in all of the more than 700 different city-states, each town and village laid claim to its own god.
The landscape of Greece is just full of gods. Gods who might not even be heard of in the next village. Every little stream, every spring of fresh water, something you come to appreciate in the dusty Greek climate, has its own divinity.
The hills divided up village from village and people from people. So each village was encouraged to have its own favorite gods and its own favorite heroes. And I think that, in terms of the natural layout of the land, was very important in the formation of myth and of their religion.
The gods were many, as were their functions. Hermes was the protector of flocks and herds of domesticated animals. Hera was the goddess of marriage as well as maternity. Eros prevailed over matters of love. Hephaestus was the god of fire and volcanoes. Poseidon ruled over the sea. There was Pan, part human and part goat. He was recognized as the shepherd's god. And there was Artemis, protector of nature and the young.
Artemis is associated with young, blooming nature, with young animals. But Artemis is also associated with the initiation of young women. So there's a continuum in Greek thinking between what happens in the natural world and what happens in what we would identify as a very different human social sphere. To Greek mythological thinking, these are all part of the same phenomenon. And that's why Artemis can be the huntress, the one who's associated with the wild, but also the one who tames young girls.
Of all the deities that influenced human life, Demeter was one of the most important. Celebrated once every 5 years, she was the goddess of corn and crops.
Greeks looked at and lived with their landscape for an awfully long time and developed stories by watching nature and by living with it. And the worship of a kind of earth goddess who protected the earth and saw to the welfare of the crops and withheld the crops if people didn't behave themselves. All of that was part of the Greek view of the cycle of nature.
The relationship between man and the divine was not simple. However, theirs was an uneasy alliance. Though the gods were powerful and immortal, they were not beyond human questioning. The ancient Greeks often criticized the immoral behavior of the gods.
They could act in excess. Each one had passions, had made mistakes, but the mortals had to respect their own boundaries. This is the main difference between gods and mortals. Gods could do anything they liked, do as they please. Mortals had to refrain from excess. Greek gods and goddesses are facets of what could become of a deadly passion. What could happen to mortals if they really step over a boundary.
Now, we might think of criticizing the gods as a kind of blasphemy, but in fact, it reinforces the notion that the gods do exist. And I think what was really being criticized were other Greeks' attitudes about the gods. Something that's very hard for us to understand is that the Greeks could play with their notions of gods.
Superior to the humans over whom they held sway, the gods were nevertheless subject to the same passions, failures, and weaknesses of mortals. They knew love, despair, and tragedy. They took on human form and were vulnerable to injury and illness. But unlike people, they healed quickly.
Of course, they weren't just humans, they were different from humans in many ways. They, first of all, obviously never died. Secondly, they had incredible powers of strength and knowledge. But the reason why they're in human form is that the Greeks had tremendous pride in the human form. The Greeks had such high value for the perfection of human intelligence and physicality that they could not imagine a more perfect form to attribute to the gods.
This notion that the gods are humans plus seems to have answered a very deep need in the Greeks. It's a sort of fantasy of overcoming all the weaknesses that make us humans what we are.
The gods were also subject to similar laws which governed humanity. Hermes was the guardian of travelers. When he cleared a pathway by killing the 100-eyed monster called Argos, he had to stand trial for the deed.
Well, he's a god, but he's polluted. And so he had to stand trial. And the way the gods all cast their votes was by putting a stone at his foot, which made a stone heap, which is called a herm.
Though the gods were not perfect, they were not powers to be trifled with.
What you did need to do was be careful not to offend the gods. Not to set yourself up as the gods' equal, not to be arrogant in that way, because that was inviting disaster, not from any other humans, but from the gods themselves. There's the story of Salmonos, who had himself driven around on a cart, banging on shields or some noise-making implement, saying that he was Zeus and trying to imitate Zeus's thunder, and he was promptly dispatched with a thunderbolt.
I think everybody believed that somebody really powerful had to be in charge of lightning, and the obvious candidate was Zeus. Zeus was a weather god, primarily. In fact, when it rained, you said, Zeus is raining. You didn't say, it's raining. And so lightning, just this powerful, strange thing that can kill you, obviously had to be under the control of someone like Zeus.
In Athens, the people also worshipped a god with no name, one who was simply referred to as the unknown god.
The shrine to the unknown god was probably the Athenians' way, in their own religious system, of covering their bets. Just in case there was a god out there that they hadn't managed to worship, a god that might do something to them, they had a shrine to the unknown god.
The Greeks rationalized the world around them. Philosophy and intellectual thought flourished, most of all in Athens. It was here that Athena presided in noble splendor over the people, goddess of war and patron of the arts. She was honored in the form of a gold, ebony, and ivory statue at the Parthenon. It was believed that her symbolic presence would make the city invincible to attack. Thousands came to pay tribute to her here, in one of the finest buildings ever constructed. But of all the sacred places in ancient Greece, few approached the significance of a tree-lined valley of unsurpassed beauty and strange power. For it was here that the Greeks came to learn of their future. This is Olympia. 2,500 years ago, a 40-foot-high statue stood here. It was made of gold and ivory, and was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Dedicated to Zeus in celebration of his omnipotence, this ancient wonder presided over the oldest known organized sporting event on Earth, the Olympic Games.
Every 4 years, the Greeks from all over the Greek world and the islands and Italy would come to Olympia to celebrate this festival.
Restricted to only males, including spectators, Naked athletes competed for crown and glory under a burning sun in 5 events: the broad jump, discus throwing, javelin hurling, wrestling, and the 200-yard dash. While the object of the games was to win, the purpose was to worship.
According to one scholar, David Sansone, he believed that the athletic event is an expenditure of ritual energy for the gods. And in fact, one way of showing this is that what the athletes did was sweat. And they sweat and they had dirt on them and they had olive oil on them. And after they finished competing, they cleaned off the scum from their skin using a strigil. And they actually collected the scum from the athletes, which was thought to have magical properties. And in a sense, they were reaping the product of human energy and having this as a magical potion that the gods would honor.
This, then, was Olympia. And to this day, around the world, winning an Olympic event remains an accomplishment beyond comparison.
When I had the luck to win the Olympic Games and come first, my country hadn't had a first place in any Olympics for over 50 years. All this was very exciting for a young person. You know, the idea that you get onto the podium, your achievement is honored only by a medal and nothing else. You hear the national anthem of your country, you see the Greek flag going up. These things remain in your mind. And I've often said that that is the greatest feeling in my life, other than getting engaged to my wife.
Another site central to the ancient Greeks is Delphi. Mystical and mysterious, Delphi is perhaps best known as the place where a famous oracle resided. Also known as the Oracle of Apollo, she provided clues to those who sought insight into the future.
The Oracle of Apollo was a priestess who was named the Pythia. People would come from all over the known world to seek the advice of this priestess for important questions, often affairs of state, political questions, and direction.
Unfortunately, the oracle spoke in a language no one could understand. Her pronouncements on the future had to be translated by a prophet. But even then, her prophecies were often obscure.
There's one famous ambiguous answer in which a great king asks the oracle, "Should I go to war?" And the oracle says, "If you go to war, you will destroy a great kingdom." And so the guy goes to war, and of course his kingdom is the great one destroyed, and he should have read that the right way. The oracle always gives you a kind of question in return, a puzzle, an enigma that you have to answer.
Humans are born, and they grow up, and they make a choice to do this and to do that. At any point in their life, they could go to Delphi and hear an oracle like, "Beware of the sea because it will kill you." And you spend your whole life avoiding the sea so that you won't get killed. Then one day, you're in an aquarium, and a tank bursts, and you drowned in this seawater, in this saltwater aquarium, or something more sensible than that. Did fate make that happen? No. It's just the God knew the future and could say that it was going to happen.
Delphi was also the place where a son of Zeus presided. His name was Apollo. In addition to presiding over Delphi, Apollo had other responsibilities. He was the god associated with sexuality and love. Ironically, Apollo himself was never known to be a great lover.
Apollo is beautiful. He's the most beautiful male, as Aphrodite's the most beautiful female. He is the best athlete. He is a beautiful singer. He is strong and a marvelous archer. He's your perfect